Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome back to Adventure Capital, where we not only discuss the entrepreneurial journeys and adventures with founders who have raised capital on Wefunder, but also the different resource providers and mentors helping founders along the way. Huzzah! In this interview, we chat with Weston Baker, the founder and CEO of Morphic, a platform that lets you build a website with the polish and perfection of a creative agency, but for a fraction of the price. Before we get on with the podcast, we're required to let everyone know that anything we say here should not be interpreted as investment advice, recommendations, or soliciting investments in any company. All companies raising on Wefunder are given an equal opportunity to participate in the podcast based on the progress of their campaign. Wefunder gang, take it away.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Adventure Capital. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Weston Baker, who's the founder of Morphic. Weston, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Maybe you could get started by giving us a high-level overview on what is Morphic.
Yeah, sure. So Morphic is a no-code SaaS platform that automates creative agency services. So starting with website builder, but essentially it's a creative agency as a service. So it's a product that's empowering non-designers and democratizing access to top quality design and tailored guidance.
And how sophisticated do those websites get? Is it front end, or is there like a lot of sophisticated, like deep kind of infrastructure on the back end as well?
So Morphic as a whole, like our kind of guiding mission is to automate and productize everything that we've done on the creative agency side. I started a creative agency back in 2014 in New York City. We found a lot of success with this kind of design process and strategy and coming up with concepts and brand expression for companies. And we, really long story short, found ways to automate that. And so right now, the product kind of simulates what we would do as an agency. There's an onboarding flow that a user can go through when they first get on the platform. It asks a bunch of questions about differentiation, your industry, the focus, your website goals, your brand styles. And then Morphic basically takes all that info, and there's an algorithm that essentially kind of maps what we do manually if we were working with a company. And within about 8 to 12 seconds, it builds a website, connects it to a content management system. It starts building a staging link so you can actually preview the site. And so it's pretty much, the big difference here is that we're not looking to build templates and start with a template where you have to kind of go in and do it yourself. We're looking more to automate what an agency would do if they were there for 8 to 12 weeks and chatting with you, going through the design process, using the best practices, and then presenting you with the final design. That's kind of our North Star. So the sites are right now, I'd say they're relatively sophisticated, but we're creating new features and we're building out a much more robust knowledge-based and rules-based system for how these design strategies can be applied to websites. So they're very, very tailored to each customer. Yeah, kind of a long answer, but that's kind of how the platform works right now.
So creative agency, 8 to 12 weeks, Morphic, 8 to 12 seconds. Got it. How did you get into this? So you had the creative agency, and then you just had this kind of revelation that, wait, actually, like a lot of what we're doing here can be built with software, which can then make it like much, much cheaper and quicker for maybe even better for clients. And so then it's just like kind of you built the kind of software company out of the first-hand experience running the agency, it sounds like.
Yeah, they're kind of like a few things that were kind of happening at the same time that converged. So one, we had the boutique creative agency. We're doing like branding, marketing materials, website design, product consulting, UX, UI. We worked with a lot of startups, a lot of venture capital groups, private equity groups. And we just found that there are a lot of repeated tasks. And so even if we're doing a totally custom design for a company and doing custom website design, there may be 80% of the same work for creating a team page for one company versus another, even if they look totally different and they're on brand for each other. And the setup, engineering wise, there may be this, it's, you have an image, you have a name, a position, you have some other data associated with that element, and then you have to connect it to a CMS so that it's easy for the client to adjust once the site is live. That's just one example of one of the setups that's kind of a common thing. So to us, it felt kind of almost like silly that we're charging these agency rates to do
the
a repeated
thing
task
over and over.
Yeah, exactly. And then we found that at the same time, we were working with a couple of companies who typically, they had these projects where they didn't know exactly what the end product needed to be yet for their website. So they kind of knew the components and they knew the type of content they would want to have, but they weren't going to be able to sign off on a final design. So we kind of invented this little system for these particular projects where we were going to design these layouts that were highly flexible and on brand for them. So we could build the site and have these components where once they know what they need, they'll be able to go in and assemble the sites themselves and kind of control even like styles, like a light theme, dark theme, medium theme for these different layouts. And then they could plug in the content. They don't have to mess with the interface at all. It's all in like a headless CMS. So it's totally custom designed and they just plug in the content and it works perfectly. So we actually found those were really, really successful projects because it gave them the flexibility, but full custom like agency, top quality design. And so they actually then never had to come back to us to add any custom designs to it because it just works so well. So we started to kind of think about, could we productize this? Does this work with our larger design process and creative problem solving and like the tailored solutions we would do for very different clients? And so we kind of, I think back in August 2020, we started building this proof of concept kind of, build where we designed the algorithm, we designed the onboarding flow, we matched our kind of agency questionnaire that we would typically go through.
And there's probably some things, right, which are like more easily standardizable and kind of automatable. And then there's some things that like, okay, it's a little bit harder to kind of replicate that human element.
Totally. Like there are elements where if your goal is to get some newsletter signups on your website, and that's kind of your primary thing, there are specific places that we can drop in those sections and on specific pages based on the industry that you're in, with the right amount of copy that it might require for kind of the user experience. And so those are things where there are a lot of best practices that can kind of guide us. But the other existing products out there right now, a lot of which are great, they are kind of do it yourself. So if you don't know those best practices, you really need an expert to jump in. So then you could use one of the self-serve products, but they don't really take any of the info from you and do anything with it. So like if you go on, I won't name any names, but if you go on some of them right now and you plug in that you're a venture capital group, you'll be presented with like a hairdresser template. It just takes zero info from the user to present them with options and with design solutions. So that's kind of what we're trying to tackle, is how can we really productize what we found to be the model of success on the agency side for what worked for our customers. And that's what we're finding is working.
Is there still a lot of, or some kind of human interaction? Is there still some feel where it's like, okay, my Morphic, whatever, representative or like specialist is kind of, walking me through it? Or are you trying to like, as soon as possible, get to a like fully self-service kind of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a huge, robust product and undertaking. So we've been kind of working in stages of automating major chunks of the product. And so a big picture, we've been, switching from being a creative agency to being a creative agency with this like internal tool to now a SaaS platform with an internal creative team. So it's kind of like switched over. And so, yes, we're still augmenting the product and the features that it has for all the things that we are not automating yet, but will be. We are providing hours of support annually for any of the subscriptions to kind of jump in and help out. So we can really do anything that our creative agency would have done in the past. So even if it's creating custom icon designs or if it's like a custom engineering feature. So we can jump in and help out where the product will be a lot more
Like that.
feature complete and be able to accomplish those things down the line.
It's kind of a bridge solution in the
Yeah,
end.
exactly.
Do you feel like having that kind of human stopgap bridge then delays the automation?
So yeah,
it's a hard balance, right?
It's a good question. I think the starting point of, like the 8 to 12 seconds is a huge game changer, because you're all of a sudden, when you go through onboarding and you plug in this info, the thing that it generates looks so much more like your brand, your website, your type of content, your industry. Like we're even pulling in assets based on the keywords in your industry. And so that starting point, it makes the users feel a lot more like they are being listened to and their goals are being listened to. And then so the inputs have an output that actually relates back to what they plugged in versus the hairdresser template. And so there is that amount of time though, where we're going to be working with a copywriting company to kind of automate some of the copy as well. But there is content that needs to be plugged in to like truly reach the point where you can launch. So we're working through some of those things where you do need some of that unique stuff. You can't just click the button and then launch the site and have it be totally right. So one of the other things that we're mapping out right now is kind of this, we're kind of internally calling it Morphic Ai, but it's not actually going to be AI, I don't think, is an interaction kind of tool where you can communicate with the product. And so instead of you going in to build a new page or to add a team member, you can kind of have a more conversational interaction with the product and say, I would like to add a new page. And then you could define the type of page. And then based on, Morphic already has this information about your brand and your differentiation and your styles and your assets. So it can actually propose the page layout instantly. And then you can give feedback as if you're talking to your agency about it. And the product will redesign it right there. So those are the types of things where I think that doesn't really exist in any platforms that we've seen that I think will address that kind of like lack of personal kind of human interaction, because the product will be doing the same things that we would do. And we also already have kind of this system set up for recommended best practices. If you go in as a user and you try to put a white image behind white text, even though we have some like pre-built safeguards in there, the product will pop up with a recommendation that it looks like you're doing something that will have low contrast for ADA compliance and SEO purposes and legibility. Morphic would recommend that you use a dark image here. Would you like to replace it, accept or deny? And so we're trying to simplify it, explain it as the same way that we would if we were there in person.
I love it. That's really interesting. I've got a bunch of comparisons, pros and cons. You're obviously pretty biased on where you come down here of the pros and cons of Morphic versus these other options. But I was just kind of going through it. It's like, okay, Morphic versus Shopify. What and not just pros and cons, but like what are the differences? Morphic versus a kind of no code. I think of like Bubble as like a no code option. Morphic versus hiring kind of people in-house to do this, and then Morphic versus kind of outsourced creative agency. So for those kind of four comparisons, like what are the differences? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, so they're all good options too. Like I love Shopify and Bubble. Morphic is much more for informational marketing sites. So companies that are looking for presenting their services, their offerings, their product, but they're not going to be selling products on the site.
And maybe I mean more Squarespace than Shopify.
Okay, yeah. And so I think, and Squarespace is a great product too. It requires an expert though. If you really are looking to achieve agency quality, most who go in to use it, you can go in and you can use it, launch a site very quickly. So that's a huge game changer in the world of website design and development. What we see as lacking there from our customers' needs is they wouldn't use it unless they couldn't afford an agency, because it doesn't have the advice and the guidance and the tailored creative solutions and the recommended brand expression and all these things that they see as very important for telling their story, showing their brand, and having
the polish kind of and kind of perfection that you would get from an agency is kind of the key differentiator versus like a Morphic versus Squarespace.
Yeah, and I think in general, yeah, and there's Webflow also, which is a great product. But I think even on their website, they say empowering designers. And so that's kind of a big difference is we're empowering the non-designer. You shouldn't have to, and our customers shouldn't have to know design best practices and understand how to take their logo and their kind of basic style guide and figure out how to turn that into a high quality site where there's some extra meaning there, and how do you apply your brand to these interface elements and organize your content and make it mobile responsive. And if there's a new integration that comes out in your industry, Morphic will be adding to these integrations and features and kind of even just coding best practices so that going forward, when you save your site, it will inherit these upgrades. And so there are a bunch of reasons why websites kind of go out of date quickly. The average lifespan of a typical business website is actually under 3 years. So if you picture having to hire an agency each time and maybe they're charging $30K, $100K, who knows, you're paying that every 3 years because the performance of the website is usually at its best the second it's built and kind of maintains or declines depending on how it's built and if there are plugins that break or aren't maintained. And the industry is just increasing and all these different features and integrations so quickly that that's just the timeline. And so what we're building in the platform, which I think is a big difference, is it's upgrading itself over time, pushing upgrades to all real live sites, the same way that like a Tesla will push upgrades to the car. And so it's another reason why subscription makes a lot of sense versus an agency, because it's always at peak performance. You never really need to do that rebuild and spend that large chunk of money again. And even if you do a rebrand or like have an internal reason, like a giant pivot or something, you can actually still do that on the platform without starting from scratch again. So we're trying to solve for these different things that we've done well over 100 custom websites for businesses on the agency side. So we've seen a bunch of the different kind of things that can come up. And, it's always like a pain on both sides when you've launched a great website and 6 months later, a new integration comes out and a customer wants to add it and you have to scope out a project for that. And it's like a 2-week thing and you charge them a bunch of money. And then if another company wants that, you have to do that again separately. So it's kind of inefficient, and we're adding all those things just into the platform so all users have access to them.
Love it. What lessons have you learned over the last few years, both on the agency side, I guess, and now on the software platform side about, what have you been surprised? You learned lessons about what's going to work for customers here?
Yeah, I think, we're still early too, so we'll probably have a lot more answers in the coming years. But I would say one thing that we've done is we've been lucky where we have this pipeline of customers. So we've been able to fund the product just from our paying customers, but that also kind of means we're forced to kind of go a little slower versus raising a big round and potentially burning money quickly to try to find product market fit instantly and potentially not working out. So luckily we've been able to I think it's something I have witnessed because we've worked with a lot of startups in the past and helped them build their companies too, but going slow in the right direction versus fast in the wrong direction has worked pretty well. And it sometimes can feel like we're not making progress, but when you look back at what we've built, it's actually been a lot of stuff. So I think, there's always like uncertainty too in the agency world. You kind of know what to expect. Like you have a scope of a project and a timeline and deliverables, and you kind of know what you're in for. And then you just try to find the new projects, get referrals and everything. And on the product side, it's totally different ballgame because you're building a product that you have assumptions about how it'll work and if it'll solve these big problems and how big is the market and is this better than the other solutions. So that's been an interesting kind of thing to see. I think we're getting some pretty good validation, but we haven't done any dollars in advertising or sales or anything like that yet. So we're kind of right now at that point where if you ask us in 6 months, I'll probably have like a whole bunch of other other answers to give.
Probably one of the biggest learnings you mentioned earlier, probably, and the reason you started the company is like, hey, we're just recreating a lot of the same stuff over and over again. So learning is there's a software business here that we can build.
Yeah, and I think the industry is changing quickly too. There are all these different tools that come out. One big thing that we've thought about is related to what you just mentioned is the idea of automation, and kind of back to like the production line and Ford and everything, is reproducing the same thing over and over for efficiency, for cost, replacing parts, like solves all these problems. But in general, you're producing the same thing.
It creates new problems around kind of homogeneity and
exactly.
maybe a lack of kind of craftsmanship or diversity and kind of interestingness.
Yeah. And so we're kind of dealing with, how do you use automation for that efficiency and for the cost effectiveness and for applying these best practices that are somewhat universal,
but still have that magic.
Exactly. Yeah. Like then how do you introduce the unique tailored solutions to that machine so it can operate just as fast and efficiently, but totally custom?
Yeah. And there's probably an extent to which like building a software platform does contribute to that convergence. But I imagine you also having that problem with the kind of more human-based creative agency, right? Because like the same designer that works for the agency is probably going to have the same idea about capturing emails and the kind of best practice. And so there's probably going to be a lot of that convergence in a kind of human-based world as well.
It's interesting to think about, because like at the end of the day, you can kind of figure out how to code almost anything. And so it's, even if we, like you're saying, even if we do have a design process, that is something that like, it is an organized, structured thing where there are variables at play and we are trying to come up with something unique, but it is also a kind of common practice, or there are a lot of similar solutions. And sometimes there isn't a right or wrong answer for something. When we would, on the agency side, when we would do design solutions, we would usually present like 3 or 4 options. And each one I think works really well, but in different ways. So we would then present each one, and here, this one is a little bit more in this direction. And then you get feedback and go through the design rounds and end up with one. So even in the platform, we're thinking about that, like, how can we create a design solution using these design practices and strategies, and then take in the feedback and do kind of this iteration process. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
At Wefunder, obviously, we're helping founders raise capital. We're always interested in the capital journeys. So it sounds like you've just bootstrapped it, have you? Or you've just kind of had kind of the agency clients. There's kind of revenue there. Now you have paying customers, and so far you've just bootstrapped. Is that right?
Yeah, like so far up until this month, we bootstrapped. We just started raising a safe. So we're likely gonna raise a very small amount and continue to try to grow organically and with our network and do partnerships. And we have a great network of past clients who know the quality of our work, and now they're seeing what we're doing with the automation, and a bunch of them are switching over to Morphic from the custom agency sites. So that's cool. And yeah, so basically we just started raising a safe, and the goal is to, in about a year, I think, is to do a real Series A once we have pretty substantial revenue, hopefully.
We've also at Wefunder been a little more frugal, raised a little, less significantly than some of the other platforms in the space. And I mean, yeah, especially coming into this climate, right, where there's going to be downloads. There's, if you have a high burn, especially if your revenue growth is slower or kind of, even negative, then I think, to basically have a smaller team, to put less pressure on, is going to look like a very prudent decision in a few months' time, if it doesn't already.
Totally. And I think, a lot has changed in the last year alone. It's pretty crazy for like the raise amounts and
last couple of months, it feels like.
Yeah, exactly. but actually Wefunder is a great solution for that right now, because it's another solution where it added optionality for companies looking to raise money from, a different kind of avenue. And then same for Morphic too. And a lot of companies are going to be looking to still get top quality, but they might not be looking to hire that $100,000 agency now.
That's actually a great point. I didn't think of that. Yeah, this is, I think Wefunder is going to be counter-cyclical. My kind of hypothesis there is that, founders who would have raised from VCs in 2021, in 2022, that it's going to be harder for them to do that. And so our platform is going to be the product market fit increases in 2022.
Yeah.
I guess same for you as well. Yeah, a little bit less budget's a little bit tighter, and so maybe not able to kind of fork out for the creative agency, but the subscription that they're paying to you is a little more economical and
I think it kind of comes for us. We're kind of we see a big kind of product and pricing gap, and so on one side you have the very inexpensive platforms, website builders, and on the other side you have the more expensive agencies,
right.
And even in between you have the designers who can use the platforms like Webflow, and they'll still charge whatever they're going to charge for that. So we're kind of in the middle where we're about 10 times more expensive than Squarespace, but we're probably more than 10 times more affordable than an agency. So I think we're probably going to be continuing to kind of take market share from both sides of that spectrum.
Yeah,
to kind of fill that area.
So we launched this community round website last month. We probably would have got a lot more pickup on it if we'd used Morphic to build it. That's the learning from us to think about next time. But I'm curious on your take on this concept of community round, letting new customers invest, letting your community invest. What do you think? Do you think we're on the right path here?
I think it's really cool. I mean, like I said, I like optionality for one. Like we've been in a position where we've thought about different types of funding and VCs and angel investors and the Wefunders, and everyone's in a different position. We luckily have been able to kind of continue with our own thing, but I think it's really cool that you can kind of have your own sales force of your own customers and potentially even convert customers, because then they become investors. And so it's another avenue that's really interesting, and it's similar to the concept of having kind of an operator investor. Like for us, if we have a past client who is maybe a wealthy individual, or maybe they run a VC firm, if they're a user of the platform but they're also an investor, then everyone's kind of aligned, incentivized, they can promote it, and they're actually a true user, not just kind of a false promotion or something. So I think it's really cool.
Love it. If there was one, we're asking everyone this question now that comes on the podcast, if there's one company that you would love to see launch a community round on Wefunder to let Weston invest, what would be the company?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I have my own favorites, and I don't even know if they would make sense for them, but I think it'd be I use Notion all the time, so I think that would be really cool to be have a small investment in that. Our whole team uses it every day. I know a bunch of companies that use it.
Wefunder too.
Yeah. So I'll go with that one. Notion.
We'll reach out to him. We'll get him up there if we launch him. Gonna ping you and let you know. That's awesome. I think that would be a very, very popular one. Mercury currently holds the record for fastest company to $5 million. They got there in about 5 hours. I think Notion, if they launched their community round, would probably beat Mercury to the $5 million record. What about, last question for you, one piece of advice for a startup founder, as they're building their company?
Yeah. So I would say, kind of already mentioned the go slow in the right direction thing. So I'll probably say kind of have a guiding mission, or, turn that into a guiding kind of North Star statement. It's a lot easier to aim if you have a target. So I think for us, and it may not even be attainable, so for us, it's to truly automate what you would get with working with a top creative agency, but getting that instantly in zero time for zero money. That's kind of the North Star, not even from a business perspective, but that's kind of, what we would shoot for. I think that's probably what I'd recommend, because then you have that clear kind of mission, and if you can build a product around it, then that's awesome. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
I love it. Well, that's a really awesome note to end on. Weston, thanks so much for coming on the pod and sharing your wisdom. It's a really interesting space for Wefunder founders and this audience to learn about. So thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Venture Capital. I hope you laughed, took notes, shed a tear, and most importantly, feel ready to go off on your own adventure. And remember, whenever you're ready, Wefunder's here to help. Be sure to like and leave a review, gang.